idea is that whoever earns more should really be able to pay more. It should have the capacity, the buying power, the purchasing power to buy more in terms of like giving more for what you are giving them. So everybody's trying to get something out of it. So if I don't work for the government, how do I benefit from this? I increase my price. So it's a normal analogy in the country. Oh, well, I guess I would like to start from what he said. When he started the conversation, the first thing he mentioned was that from 30,000 to 70,000 was a milestone. He said after the presidency brought that to be, they celebrated it because it was actually a milestone. And I think that's so true if you have to look at the data. So that's about 133% increase from 30 to 70,000. And maybe, yeah, a good number of persons clapped for them, which I think is also a thing to celebrate. However, he went on to say that looking at the current reality, there's a need to reassess, there's a need to vet, to evaluate what is more preferred or preferable at this present time. And I think I love what he said and the way he expressed his thoughts. But let's take it a step further now, because we understand why that is a problem is because had it was increased to 70% and inflation had not gotten to its peak as well, it could have been a good situation for an average person who earns that salary. Okay. But it became an issue because food inflation came to be. Other inflationary pressures around the economy started mounting, and so you cannot expect people to still break even or make a living in that situation. So okay. I guess maybe just to put it in practical terms, an average person who earns that kind of salary, we have to spend the bulk of it on transportation and feeding. So what's left to save? What's left to invest? What's left to grow and become maybe somebody who's looking for generational wealth? What's left to build an enterprise? And that's the question, because it's not really enough if you have to consider paying so much for transportation, paying so much for feeding. All of those things are still a conversation. But I wanted to do a bit of empirical analysis this morning. So I brought out about 5 countries, including Nigeria, and see how much these people earn. I did an approximate, national minimum wage for some of the countries. And I'll start with South Africa. Which is where, sometimes when we talk about why do people go to some places, people are not stupid. They don't just fly to places just because they think that place is fine or it has a beautiful architecture or scenery. People are going there because they've read the economics. The economics in South Africa is way better, and this is why. An average approximately, let's say an average approximate monthly minimum wage in South Africa is about $250 to $300 per month. So that means that let's not just stay on that money, because I'm trying to use the equivalent of the US dollar now. Now let's now say what is the context, what's the economic context of that particular country. There's lower inflation and there's stronger social protection. So that's one thing. So it's not really about how much people get paid. It's about the other factors like inflation, like the price of fuel, like you mentioned as well. All of those things are in the conversation. If you raise it to 1 million naira today and the inflation keeps skyrocketing, it will affect everybody who earns that 1 million naira. So it's not really about how much you pay us or pay the Nigerian people. It's also about other factors that are attached to the payment you are giving them. And again, after South Africa, we'll look at Morocco. So an average Moroccan, if so to say, who works in the country earns about $320 to $340 per month. But what is the economic context? The context is that there's more stable inflation and stronger manufacturing base. You can see some of these things are the things that are lacking in the country. I went on to do the third country, which is Botswana. I think Botswana is also in the South African region. And Botswana also maybe doesn't pay as much as the others. It pays about $120 to $150 per month. But the context, this economic context in Botswana is the smaller economy with relatively higher living standards. Now, we'll now get back to Nigeria. The recent money, 70,000 naira, is equivalent to $45. It does not match any of those countries I've listed: Botswana, South Africa, and Morocco. It's not even anywhere near it. So if they earn $250 to $300, $120 to $150, and an average person in Nigeria that works for the government who earns just $45, you can see that there's a gap. And it's not just because at that, I'm talking about the recent rate now, according to what I have this morning. But then the context now, the economic context of the country, Nigeria, is that there's high inflation and elevated living costs. Every time you hear that the government has increased minimum wage, it's just so ordinary and it's so convenient and it's so natural that the prices of items in the market will skyrocket. I don't know how these people get to know. Well, they listen to the news, right? But I try to ask myself, why is this always a thing? It's always a thing because the idea is that whoever earns more should really be able to pay more. It should have the capacity, the buying power, the purchasing power to buy more in terms of like giving more for what you are giving them. So everybody's trying to get something out of it. So if I don't work for the government, how do I benefit from this? I increase my price. So it's a normal analogy in the country. And that is not to say it is right, because I really do not think it is anywhere near right. But this is the situation in Nigeria. So if we have to look at some other countries, because I think we have ourselves to look at, we have the country to look at, but much more so, can we look at other, I didn't want to do any analysis on maybe developed countries, so I'm talking about the countries within the continent. South Africa, Morocco, and you see Nigerians everywhere, and this is what they are looking for. If an average person that you even want to expatriate, or you've expatriated them back to Nigeria from South Africa, they are not crying because they lost something. They are crying because they have come to the country again. Because what took them out of this country is still what they are meeting back in the country. So if you say that you want to increase from 70,000 naira to whatever, and it's also a question again, I was looking out for a date, but I didn't get a date from Femi Gbajabiamila. I was hoping to see, okay, because you just mentioned, it's like a blanket statement to say, we are working on this, we will work on this. When should Nigerians expect this? That's a conversation that we should have. I will also maybe put an addition to it. There was a news, I don't know if you are abreast of this, that the NLC and the TUC, the organized labor unions, were looking for a way to get 1 million naira into the hands of an average worker. It was even, I mean, at some point, everybody was talking about 1 million naira for an average, okay. But we understand maybe that's why they are putting it, like you mentioned, they have to know how to strategize, because if there's anybody that prices things in Nigeria, I think it's the federal government. Let me put it in Yoruba. Federal government, manoja, be our mothers. The way they do, you know, they don't do cutting. They don't do cutting like, okay, let's give from maybe 25,000 and now let's do the midpoint of 14.5. No, they go straight to what is, and you remember, like according to what they said 133% increase from 30,000 to 7. So I think they are looking at the percentage increase, and in a sense, I'm not sure they would do anything that is more than 150%, even if there's going to be an increment. So an increment that we're expecting now might not be as much as people expect. But let me just round off my thought to say there are many improvements that this would do to a lot of people. I mean, even society. People would, of course, people will be at the very end of this, because it will improve disposable income for millions of Nigerians, which is very true. It also stimulates consumer spending and, of course, potentially reduce poverty among formal sector workers and employees. But the problem, some of the blind spots that we are talking about, and we should really lay accent on, is that it will increase government wage bills. Some states who cannot... I don't want to go there, but we understand some states cannot, they don't have the capacity to generate internally as much as other states. Those states will be at the mercy of maybe the federal government allocation or maybe borrowing.
Speaking about state, just to, sorry to quote you now, do you know that immediately the federal government increased the minimum wage, certain states also increase, you know, their own as well.
Your state, they put 10,000.
Exactly, Lagos State and, you know, quite a number of other states. So that's commendable.
But some states are still arguing they can't pay 70,000.
Some are telling you they cannot pay it because even with the increase in the allocation they get. That's why when the president said, hold your governors accountable, I mean, it didn't stutter. We need to get to that point whereby, you know, the people of each state will begin to hold their governors accountable to say, Alpha, this is what you're getting. Some of them are getting over 100% increase compared to what they were getting during the last administration. So for some governors to increase that, some increase by 10, some by 20, commendable. Because at the end of the day, we are not even saying that does not absolve the government, the federal government, of what they need to do. So basically, that was what I wanted to say.
I think I like the point that you made. But let me say the last point I was going to make is this. It will require stronger revenue mobilization and productivity improvement to remain sustainable. Not just to start. We can start, I mean, anybody can start a thing. But how sure are we that you can continue? You can sustain this for a long time. Because we are talking about years. So when you talk about any policy, when you talk about governance, you're talking about a period of Yes, it's going to be a process of time, and it will take some time. And if it takes time, it means that there's a lot of investment you need to keep doing. Not just a one-time thing, it's a continuous thing. Some states might have problems. Yes, they will, not might. They will have problems to pay whatever the government is proposing now that is bigger or higher than 70,000 naira, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but I'm just saying that states can now look inward now to improve their revenue generation. Their internal revenue generation must be at the very center of their heart. And again, productivity in the country should not be joked with. Now, there are states with special abilities and talents, and maybe let's say mineral resources now. Those states, can they start excavating or harnessing their resources for themselves and maybe give a quota, just a bit of it, to the federal government, right? Can they start? But it's just dicey too, because state governors can also do one or two in that case. But
another question I want us to ask is what the state governors are getting before the federal government will peg the minimum wage, okay, maybe at 70,000 or 80,000. I want to believe maybe they would have decided to make a provision for it in terms of the allocation that the governors will get per month.
So you think the federal government will give more allocation?
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, I mean, it will only make sense to anybody, any sane person, that before you peg minimum wage and you expect the governors to pay, I mean, it should reflect in a way, maybe not 100%, it should reflect in the kind of allocation that they get per month. And then if you look at what the governors are getting currently, maybe there will be an improvement after this new minimum wage. I really cannot tell. But for the president to come out to say at a time that hold your governors accountable,
I think that's true.
Look at what they are collecting now compared to the last 5 years. Basically,
I think your point is valid, but I'm not holding brief for the president administration or the federal government in that sense. But I think they also have a lot on their hands, right? And we know the debt situation that we are currently in the country, how that we are servicing debt and at a very higher price, because the rate of the naira to dollar is nothing to write home about. So they have problems they are also faced with. So it might be a bit difficult from their end, but I'm not saying it's not possible. It's very possible. They can do, and they should really look into it, which is a good one. But I'm also saying, can state, like you mentioned, states should now look inward, because I know there was a time when there was a regional thing in the country where regions were able to do something. For example, the region here was known for some exports. For example, cocoa export, palm oil in some states as well. So agricultural produce.
Do you know that even at a point in time, the resources that were gotten from South was used to finance the northern part?
Of course,
because
there are many of those things.
This place they had a lot.
So in places like let's say Cross River State, places with fuel, they can develop themselves and maybe give a quota to the federal government as well. And if we have development from the local setting, from the grassroots, I think that's where we should go. Because if you're talking about the federal government, there's so much we can say, but there's only so much they can do. And what we can do is now look inward. Every state, can you produce more? What do you have as natural resources? What can you do? What are your people capable of doing? And let's improve production. Let's improve capacity from the state level. And I think that's my own say.
Exactly. And it's a fine place to leave this discussion. By the time the federal government is ready to negotiate, and I want to believe that we'll get to talk about it one more time.
We hope so.